And opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Welcome to Bronx Legal, where we open the doors to the courthouse to give you your legal rights and options. I'm David Lesh. The issue of firearms has taken a high-profile position in U.S. culture and politics. Over the past few months, we've seen the issue make headlines from high-profile cases like the one involving former New York Giants star Plaxico Burress back in August, to anti-gun groups who every day try to introduce tougher gun control laws throughout New York State. Mayor Bloomberg's anti-gun group, Mayors Against Illegal Guns, is only one such lobby to push for more stringent gun control. However, it's a topic that is seldom spoken or dealt with unless a major law is passed or an unfortunate incident occurs. Today's show will touch on New York's gun possession law and take a look at some of the scenarios that lead to a gun possession arrest. Joining us in studio is attorney Peter Tilem, a senior partner at Tilem & Campbell. Mr. Tilem spent 10 years as an assistant district attorney, 6 years of which working within the firearms trafficking unit. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Am I wrong, or it just seems like every other day there seems to be another high-profile person who seems to get caught with a gun somewhere, either on their person or a bus or something else?
No, you're not wrong. And it's not just high-profile people. It's people from all walks of life. We very much live in a gun culture and a gun society. New York is a very small microcosm of what's happening in the country, but other places in the country, guns are everywhere.
Well, let's get to some definitions. We'll start from the very beginning here. When we talk about possession of a gun, I mean, there's a legal term that means something. What does it mean, really?
Okay. Well, it's very important because, first of all, in New York State, we're not talking about rifles and shotguns. We're talking about firearms, which are defined in the penal law as pistols or revolvers or a sawed-off shotgun or a sawed-off rifle. So if it has a barrel length shorter than 16 inches, it's a firearm. When we're talking about possession of a firearm, we're talking about someone who is, the legal term is exercising dominion and control over that firearm.
Okay, and that can be either, concealing it within a jacket. It could be, having it nearby their person, I would assume, maybe someplace under a back seat?
It could be in your home. You certainly, if you have a television in your house, just because you're not there, you still possess and own that television set. And it's the same with a gun. If you have a gun in your house, you're possessing it. You have it in your car, you're possessing it. And clearly, if you have it on your person, you're possessing it.
Okay, and we have a separate law for criminal possession. Now, there are certain degrees. Tell me what do we mean by, like I said, criminal possession in the second degree, criminal possession in the third degree? What does that mean?
That's a great question, because ultimately the reason Plaxico Burress had the problem he did was because there was a recent change in the law which essentially elevated criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree to criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. And what that means is that if you possessed a loaded firearm outside of your home or place of business, it used to be a Class D felony, which meant you can go to prison for up to 7 years, and there was a mandatory minimum of 1 year in jail. About 2 years ago, the legislature acted and changed that law. So they made it a C felony, which meant that if you possessed a loaded firearm outside your home or place of business, it now became a mandatory minimum of 3.5 years in prison and up to 15 years in prison. Okay. And that's what caught Plaxico Burress.
Right, all right. Now, and this has other implications, not just obviously criminal penalties and possibly jail time, but it has also immigration issues. Am I correct?
That's correct. This is a serious, you're talking about gun possession as a very serious offense, Class C violent felony, and clearly someone who's convicted would have a felony conviction, and it would impact a whole bunch of aspects of their life, including immigration.
Okay, let's talk about the types of scenarios where you can be found as in terms of possessing a gun. Let's start with the first one that I see all over the news a lot of times is the airport gun case. What do we mean by the airport gun case?
We see this gun case all the time. We get people who come here and they call the airline and say, I want to bring my gun to New York, and they're flying out of Houston, Texas, where you don't need a license for a gun, and they follow the guidelines and they call the airline and check the gun through, and they get to New York and they get their bags and they go about their business. When they come back, they follow the same procedure, and this time they're arrested.
All right, so what happens if because a lot of people think that you can call up and say you're in Louisiana or someplace else, and then you call ahead, you call up to one of the New York airports and you say, look, I have a license or a permit, or it's legal for me to have a gun, in my state. I'm coming into New York, and let's say somebody in the, it's one of the airports says, well, okay, it's not a problem. Just bring it in, whatever. Bring your papers, whatever you have, just bring it here. Bad advice, right? You fly into New York, and they find the gun, and they arrest you, put the handcuffs on you. Do you have as a defense that they told me it was okay? They said I could come in, I could just get here?
Mistake of law is not a defense.
That's right.
Ignorance of the law is not a defense. And so the answer is you tried, but that's not good enough. And you're talking about a very serious offense. If you think about this, this is one of the only items that you can possess in 34 states, in many cases without a license. And you can bring it from state to state. But if you bring it to New York, you're going to prison for 3.5 years.
Because in other states, it's almost like a rite of passage, almost like getting a bicycle. I mean, when you're fairly young, you could get a gun in a lot of these other states.
I grew up in New York, so I can't understand that culture. But from the people that I know that are from down south or from out west, where guns are just a part of the culture, yeah, they grow up, 12 years old, they get their first gun, and it's just a part of who they are and what they do.
Well, have you seen any recent cases where somebody has, I guess, not realized that New York has a tougher gun law than wherever they were from?
Just last night, I was in the Bronx courthouse on a young lady who's here studying, doing her postgraduate degree, and she brought a gun from Louisiana, where it was perfectly legal, and just didn't do anything with it. Kept it in her room and spent about 30 hours moving through Bronx Central booking last night. It's not a pleasant experience, and there were some very serious charges associated with it.
For a young lady who grows up in Louisiana, probably always had a gun, family always had a gun, thought it was okay, used it as protection, comes to New York, keeps it under the bed just for protection, and sure enough, something happens.
And why not? And if you grow up in that culture, why wouldn't you just bring the gun to New York?
All right, let's talk about the second type of gun scenario. This is another common one, the gun in the car.
Gun in the car is a scary one. Know who you're in your car with, because as you know, there's a presumption in New York.
Okay, all right, I'm driving in the car. I don't know the driver very well. I know somebody in the front seat. I'm in the back seat. Right? We get pulled over for a minor traffic violation. We go through a stop sign, or the driver does. And somehow the police officer, kind of looking in, notices a butt of a gun underneath one of the seats in the front. Can I be charged with that gun?
Absolutely. There is a presumption in New York that when a gun is found in a car, everyone in the vehicle is presumed to possess that gun. So that means that everyone in the vehicle is getting charged with criminal possession of a weapon in the second degree. And as I mentioned, it's mandatory minimum of 3.5 years in prison.
Okay, now can you negotiate that? Are there pleas that can be made with the district attorneys, or what's your experience with it?
My experience is that different counties in New York have different policies. For example, as we found out in the Plaxico Boroughs case, the New York County District Attorney's Office has a policy that if it's your first arrest, they will plead it down to a D felony and 2 years in prison. So they're going to save you 1.5 years off the mandatory minimum. In Kings County, for instance, there is no reduction. They want you to plead guilty to or be convicted of the C felony and do 3.5 years in prison.
But I have to tell you, Peter, it just doesn't sound fair. You get into a car, okay, maybe you really didn't research exactly who it was who you were in the car with, but you knew nothing about this gun. You just getting a lift, and now you're going to end up doing a mandatory 1 year worth of prison time. It just doesn't sound fair.
It's probably